Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
What day is it today? Friday. And all of today's guests, including Kevin Kurz, standing by. Brought to you by the Bayside Oceanfront Resort. Looking for a midweek escape close to home? BC residents save 15% on weekday stays at the Bayside in Parksville. Relax by the ocean, enjoy great dining, and unwind with island hospitality. Good golf courses around there. Book now at BaysideResortParksville.com. Philadelphia Flyers have their new head coach, a guy by the name of Rick Tocchet, here to talk about Tocchet and other matters with the Philadelphia Flyers. Kevin Kurz, he covers the Flyers for The Athletic. Kevin, thanks for doing this, sir. How are you?
Sure thing. Yep. Good to be here, guys.
Kevin, what made the Flyers decide? The obvious question, what made the Flyers decide on Rick Tocchet?
Well, obviously there's some pre-existing relationships here. I think it's pretty well known that Rick and Keith Jones have a pretty tight bond. Obviously, his history with the organization, he was drafted here. I think he knows what the market's all about. So I think that's initially what makes this a fit. But when you're looking at this from a Flyers perspective, I think you're just looking for a little bit of a stability here with the organization, because they do, hope that they've hit rock bottom. Danny Briere has said that he hoped that when he fired John Tortorella in March, that this was rock bottom. They want to start turning the corner. They want to start getting better. And that means trying to add players. Potentially this offseason, I think it's looking more ahead to the 2026 offseason when they have a lot of the dead money off the books. They want to be viewed as a destination team, a team that players, when they have a choice in terms of where they can play, Philadelphia is on their list. And I think from the Flyers' perspective, they believe that Tocchet is a guy that makes the organization a more appealing place because, of his popularity, of how much some star players really like playing for him. Just the fact that he's a good guy, as you guys know. And then, from his perspective, I think he looks at it as a pretty stable organization too. It was going sideways there for a little bit, but the Flyers and the Keith Jones, Danny Briere regime is now in its third year. They certainly have a lot of work to do to become a top team again, but I think Tocchet sees a ownership group that's willing to spend money. I think he sees the fact that he can have a working relationship with guys like Keith Jones and Danny Briere. And, this is also a team that has some pretty good young players and a whole lot of draft picks, 7 picks in the top 50 in the upcoming draft, as well as their first round picks moving forward. So I think, from his perspective, he sees a stable situation and some hope for the future.
Yeah, and a lot of people in Vancouver will say, well, why would you leave the Canucks for the Flyers? They finished 14 points behind. The Canucks, Rick Tocchet talks about a plan. You just laid out some of it, all those draft picks. They have a practice facility, which the Canucks don't, all that cap space. Can you see that plan? Can the fan base see that plan?
Well, I can see the plan. I can see what they're trying to do. We'll see if they get there. They certainly have a lot of work. I think 2 years ago, they did take a lot of positive steps until they faltered late. They looked like they were going to be a playoff team in 2022 or 2023, 24 when they kind of fell off the map. This year it was not as productive, but at the same time, this was a season that was all about subtraction for the team. They trade Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee to Calgary. These are two guys that were mainstays in the top 9. Scott Lawton was basically the emotional heartbeat of this team. They trade him to Toronto. So that didn't obviously help their on-ice product. But the two positions that are kind of a mess right now on this team are the goaltending and the center position, and those have to be addressed. They have Samuel Ersson, who I think they still believe in, but I think they look at him more as a 1B at the moment until he can show he can do more than that. The backups, it was just a complete train wreck this season. Neither of these guys they had backing up was NHL caliber. The power play was terrible, so I think they look at Tocchet as a guy that can help to fix that, maybe based on some of the success he had, particularly in Pittsburgh. But it was a decent power play there in Vancouver also. So there are some things that they have to fix here. There are some things they have to get right, but they do want to take a step forward next season. I think they want to be at least in the conversation for a playoff spot. If maybe that's not the end goal, they at least want to be better than they were this year. But they again, they really look, I think, at the 2026 offseason and that season after that as when they want to compete again. They want to be in the mix for the playoffs then. So it's, it looks pretty far away right now, and Briere's got his work cut out for him, but I do expect they're going to be pretty active this offseason and, maybe at points throughout the next 14 months, certainly.
Hey, Kevin, Philadelphia is a great hockey town, intelligent hockey base there. Do you think they're going to be patient with Tocchet? I mean, it's been 5 years. I mean, that's a long time to be out of the playoffs for a good hockey market.
Yeah, patience is wearing thin here a little bit. It's weird here. There's definitely a certain portion of the fan base, and I think it's the younger portion of the fan base that they look at the hiring of former people in the organization as like a red flag, right? Because they almost, I think a lot of them were against hiring Tocchet because they're just going to bring in another former player again, which I think is a silly way to think about it. At the same time, I think I have to have some sympathy here because this team has only won one playoff series in 13 years or something. So they're probably fed up, which I can understand that. Their patience, they're at their wits' end with the organization in some respects. So I think something that'll obviously help is the fact that Tocchet is a good communicator, right? Every day they'll see him up there, and the ones that are really dialed into this team, they'll see him up there at the podium every day, answering questions, going into detailed responses, being honest. I think, as you guys know, he's a pretty honest guy when it comes to his interactions with reporters and the message that he's trying to relay to the fan base. I think that'll help, but. I do think most of the fans understand that the team next season is not ready to compete for a Stanley Cup, but I do think they are at a point here where they need to see some improvements, and it has to happen sooner than later.
Got a great young talent there, Michkov, Tortorella. Everybody was worried about, take the creativity away. Well, guess what? Tocchet, you got to play without the puck with him as well. What do you think about that Tocchet-Michkov relationship and how it's going to be?
Well, I'll tell you, I think one narrative that I've seen out there that I think is completely false is that Tortorella and Michkov didn't mesh.
Right.
That's 100% not the case. I think they had a very strong relationship. Michkov has said that himself in some Russian language interviews after the season, that he enjoyed playing for Tortorella. And, they were both very similar guys. I mean, the competitiveness is through the roof with both of them. And I think the one complaint that Michkov had with Tortorella was that his ice time wasn't where it needed to be. And we saw when Tortorella got fired and Brad Shaw came in, Michkov's ice time went up something like 3 minutes per game. But I think they had a very healthy relationship basically throughout the course of their time together. So I can't imagine that's going to be a problem. I think Tocchet might be a little bit old school like Tortorella, but I don't think we're going to see Tocchet bench him for 2 out of 3 periods or healthy scratch him unless something really goes wrong. But my impressions of Michkov is he understands this is a process, but his drive to get better, his desire to get better, really is up there with anyone I've ever covered before, and I think that's why. In some respects, he's a player that coaches like Tortorella and like Tocchet are looking forward, enjoy coaching.
Hey, Kevin, before I let you go, just touching on something you talked about earlier, are you telling me that there's a portion of the fan base that are tired of talking about the old days, the Broad Street Bullies, and even later on with Tocchet and Keenan and Peter Zezel, the late Peter Zezel? Because that era, especially the Broad Street Bullies, is revered up here. People love that type of hockey.
Yeah, and it's an interesting balance that the organization is trying to walk right now because, Ed Snyder was such an icon in this town as the owner, right? The guy that'll do anything to win. He died, I believe, in 2016. They brought in a new management group, and that new management group basically tried to pivot from everything that Ed Snyder stood for, and it never made any sense. And I wasn't covering the team then, but I know enough people here to know that it was getting kind of run into the ground from not just an on-ice perspective, but a business side perspective with some of the decisions that some of the people in charge were making here. So what Keith Jones and Danny Briere have tried to do is sort of reestablish that culture of what Ed stood for. But they, while also looking forward, right? So it's a tough sort of line they're trying to walk here. And obviously bringing in a guy like Rick Tocchet, who I'm sure, we didn't ask him today, but I'm sure he would have nothing but positive things to say about his time playing for Ed Snyder. It does sort of reflect that maybe they're trying a little bit too hard, but I don't think that's the reason Rick Tocchet is a coach here. I think if Rick Tocchet had never played a game here in Philadelphia, he still would have been on the short list of candidates. So, we'll see. If it starts to go wrong, you're going to start to hear the complaints around here of, well, that's what happens when they don't think outside the box and they just bring in all these old school guys, these former Flyers. But, when you're general manager, you can't listen to any of that stuff. You hire the best guy you think for the job. And I think they would consider Tocchet that best guy for the job. He hasn't collected a paycheck from the Flyers since his last year as a player here, which I think was 2002. He's coached in 5 different organizations, none of them the Philadelphia Flyers. So, that argument that they're just bringing in a retread coach that they're familiar with, it doesn't hold water because he hasn't worked here in more than 20 years.
Dave Schultz and Andre Dupont are only 75 years old, and I hear they're considering comebacks, Kevin. Tell Rick that. He'll love it. Thanks for this, my friend.
They can be the new assistants.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, or lace on the blades. Or strap on the blades. Thanks for this, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, guys. Take care.